Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this AWS on-air session. I'm Steve Roberts, a developer advocate for .NET and PowerShell at AWS, and I'm joined by my co-host Kyle. Kyle, let everyone know who you are.
Hey there, I'm Kyle Dickinson. I'm with the AWS Threat Detection and Incident Response Practice, where we own and operate the AWS Customer Incident Response Team.
Cool. All right. So in this session, we're going to be talking about .NET modernization, and to do that, we're joined by Sananda. Welcome, Sananda, to the session. Please introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about what your role at AWS.
Absolutely. Hey guys, my name is Sananda. I'm a senior product manager and I work on application modernization space within .NET.
Cool. All right. Well, welcome to the show. So modernization of .NET applications. I guess modernization, it's a pretty large topic, right? It's like DevOps. Everyone has their own definition of DevOps. Everyone has their own definition of modernization. When we're talking about .NET modernization, what exactly do we mean at AWS?
Absolutely. So .NET, yeah, I completely agree. Modernization is a very vague term. So within the context of .NET, when we think about .NET, historically, the platform has evolved over time. It started with the Windows-only .NET framework that customers have used for decades to build applications that are specific to Windows. And now the future of .NET, which started with the name .NET Core and is now just called .NET, is really built to be cross-platform, which means that it opens the opportunity for customers to run it not only on Windows, but also on Linux, also on Mac instances. So it's the future and direction of .NET, where .NET is heading. So when we talk about .NET modernization, what we're really talking about is how to get those legacy applications that are written in .NET framework that were built for Windows only and get those moved and upgraded to these .NET Core and modern .NET versions, such as .NET 5, .NET 6, so that they can actually take advantage of license freedom, run on Linux, and give them the option to do so. Some customers choose to run on Linux, some customers choose to remain on Windows, but still move over to the modern .NET platform so they get the benefits of all the new features, new performance benefits, and things like that. So .NET modernization really is kind of figuring out how to get your legacy .NET framework application and run it on the modern .NET Core, .NET 5, .NET 6 versions.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned all the different .NET versions then, because it gets to be quite a tongue twister when we go through Core 5. So just to clarify for everyone, when we talk about .NET in this session, we're talking about the cross-platform .NET, yes, the one that's having all the the enhancements and changes over time. .NET Framework, which is essentially now frozen in time at 4.8, we'll say specifically .NET Framework. But when we say .NET, we mean .NET Core, .NET 5, .NET 6, .NET 7, and so on into the future.
Yes, .NET is the cross-platform versions, all of it. So.
Cool.
So when you say .NET, was it 4.8 is kind of frozen in time? Does that mean that is no longer having any feature releases or security updates to it, and the focus is on .NET Framework?
So it's the other way. So the .NET Framework is, I know the naming really is very confusing. Mm-hmm. So .NET Framework is the Windows-only kind of frozen in time version that we have. That's the older one. No new features coming in a .NET Framework, kind of sitting there. Customers still have large applications written in .NET Framework, and that's why they want to move over to .NET, the modern version, which is where all the new features are going in and all the effort is being put in to build and grow that platform.
Okay, so .NET Framework is a frame frozen in time.
Yeah, it is getting security updates, but it's having no new enhancements. So there is that.
Oh, that's
okay. Good. So when we're porting our applications then from .NET Framework to .NET, I'm sure it's not as easy as it sounds, right? So what are the typical challenges that development teams are encountering?
Yeah. So what we see is these legacy .NET Framework applications are written in large monolithic format. And when you really look at the code, there's a lot of thousands of NuGet packages and API calls that those .NET Framework applications are making. So there's a lot of problems that we see customers face. One is that because these applications are so old in some cases, the actual developer who may be dealing with that doesn't really have an understanding of the application that may have been written before their time. So they've kind of inherited this large monolithic legacy application, and they don't really understand the inner workings of how things work and what kind of APIs are being called, and just the inventory of everything that's in that application, right? The other thing we see is then even if you have an understanding and you are familiar with the legacy app, you kind of have to be able to understand and tell which APIs and which NuGet packages won't need any changes when you think about moving from .NET Framework to .NET, and which APIs would need changes. So you have to have the sense of both the .NET Framework world and the .NET world to be able to say, out of my 1,000 APIs, I think 700 of them need to be changed or upgraded to work with .NET, and the other 300 don't need any changes. So that's another issue that we see. Then when you think about, okay, even if customers understand that, X percentage of their application needs to be changed, they actually have to know what it needs to be changed to. Sometimes it's a full change of namespace. Sometimes it's a version upgrade when you look at the APIs and the NuGet packages that are being called. So then there's a question of, do you know how to change those, right? So all these layers of inventory collection, understanding what kind of calls you have and what changes you need become kind of problematic. And what we see is because of all these uncertainties, customers find it a little challenging to even get started.
I was going to say that all sounds like a tremendous amount of work.
So a lot of time there that's needed to modernize the application.
A lot of source code potentially a lot of source code changes, a lot of project file changes, etc. So I understand you're going to show us a tool that helps with all of that.
Yes, absolutely. So this is where we built Porting Assistant for .NET, kind of taking in all these customer problems and their business value for modernizing .NET applications. So let's just go to a demo.
Okay.
I love demos. Let's do it.
I love demos.
Absolutely.
I like looking at things. Perfect.
So we'll start with this screen, and I'll tell you, Porting Assistant for .NET is built to help you port your applications, .NET Framework applications, to the .NET versions, .NET Core versions. So it's available in two modes. One is what you're seeing on the screen, which is the standalone kind of executable tool that you can download from our AWS profile, from our AWS product page. And the other version is actually as a Visual Studio plugin, which is also what I will walk through at some point. So let's get started with this one. So this is kind of the landing page when you download the tool, and you can get started by clicking here. So I already have a .NET Framework application assessed, but if you want to assess a new application, you will kind of click Assess New Solution and choose a solution file that you want to start assessing. So this is where it starts kind of looking at your application to understand the inventory. But let's go ahead with this NAP Commerce open source project that I've kind of already assessed. So once you assess an application, this is kind of the general screen that it opens up. And what this is showing is basically a summary of all the NuGet packages in your .NET Framework application and how many of those are compatible and incompatible against your .NET version. And then the same info is shown also for APIs. So you can see there's about 1493 APIs and 513 of those are incompatible. The remaining are compatible, meaning they'll work. You don't need to make changes to those, and they work in .NET Framework and also .NET. So as it is from just this bar, you kind of get to see a lot of information at a very 1,000-foot level of what your application looks like and what the level of effort would be really.
So at this level, I'm basically looking at I won't say, well, I'm going to say feasibility, right? Is this going to be a large amount of work or a relatively small amount of work?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So this is kind of the scoping and feasibility analysis. And this is why this kind of stage is called assessment, because really you're analyzing and assessing the scope, the feasibility of the problem for yourself and for your team. So next, here it shows there's a lot of nuanced information that it shows in the tool. So we'll start with each tab. In the projects tab, you kind of see all the projects in your solution file that the application has. And we see that the target project framework, the starting point is .NET 4.8, which is what this application is written in. So it's a legacy .NET Framework application. And then it tells you within each project, what are the incompatible packages and APIs, how many of those are incompatible. So you can kind of see, at a zoomed out level, what are all your packages and what kind of issues it has, and what is the scope of, compatibility and incompatibility.
So now I can see, like, my hotspots of incompatibility across my projects. Okay.
Exactly.
Looks like your web project is firing off a lot of things there. What was the runtime for this to kind of generate these resultant information for you?
The time it takes to assess? Yeah, so usually we see, that's a very good question. Usually we see anytime from 5 minutes to maybe 20 minutes, depending on the application size and the lines of code. It depends on the factors like how large your application is, what kind of system you're running it on. But typically we see anytime from 5 to 25 minutes. I considered doing the assessment during the demo, but I was like, maybe not.
The demo
We probably won't have time for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's about, you kind of hit assess and then you kind of wait for a little bit before it generates the report.
Well, that's pretty handy.
All right. So what were those other tabs at the top? So we have project references.
So let's look at project references. So this is really where we see customers kind of get a zoomed in dependency visualization of all the projects. So these are the same projects we saw in the previous tab, but they're kind of visualized in a manner that you can see which ones are most called and most referenced. So you can see this NOP core, NOP web framework, NOP services are really the ones that are being referenced a lot or referencing other projects as well. So, you can kind of, again, this is also meant for information, giving customers kind of an alternate view of what your entire solution looks like and what the dependencies look like. And what we see is customers kind of use this to, figure out kind of a strategy of where to start modernizing first. Like, should we pick, inside out or outside in kind of a modernization? So you can kind of click on each node being a project, and see which other projects are being referenced within that project. So it kind of gives you, and the problem we talked about, that some customers inherit these legacy applications with no idea of how the structure is. This is aimed at helping kind of inform or helping them understand what their application looks like and what are the dependencies.
Cool.
Yeah,
so
what are the chances that a legacy application that they need to modernize actually has the documentation still available to
Exactly.
Probably very low.
Yeah.
Barely, yeah. So that's a pretty big concern that we see with customers. It's just not knowing how that application works inside under the hood.
So I have all this assessment data. And let's say that I've made a decision now, I'm going to start somewhere. How does this tool now help me with those code changes, those manual changes that you were mentioning earlier on?
Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to cover the other remaining files too, so we get a little bit more information. And then we'll go on to how it actually helps making those changes too. So here at the NuGet package, and it's same at the API level, you actually now get to see the meat of the recommendations coming in, because you see all the NuGet packages that are called and referenced, and you see whether those are incompatible or not. So you can see that almost all in the first page are incompatible. But what it also does is suggest you how to make it compatible for the packages where it does have knowledge. So we're constantly learning from the data and constantly improving our recommendations. But this is where really the value starts coming in, is you see, AutoFac is not compatible, but if you make it to version 4.0, it's going to be compatible.
Okay.
And the same goes for APIs as well. Kind of does the same, tells you whether it's compatible or incompatible, and if it has any suggested replacements, it will do so.
All right.
And the last thing I will show in this standalone version is the source file view. So, customers after kind of getting this inventory kind of zoomed out view also want to see what it looks like in the code. So now you can actually go to this .cs files, individual.cs files, and see what recommendations and detections Porting Assistant is doing for you. So you can see the NOP core reference is going to be replaced. It tells you what it's going to be replaced with. And then also some of the calls that are being made. If it detects that it's incompatible and it knows how to make it compatible, it kind of shows you there itself in the line of code. So you can start seeing really where the changes are going to be in the code. And this is where we actually see, okay, now we have provided sufficient information for the customers through this assessment step. And now I want to go and I want to actually make those changes, right? Like I want to get started to moving. So this is where the porting action comes in for Porting Assistant. It helps you kind of port your application to, and some of the changes that it recommends, it does it itself. And this is why we kind of released the Visual Studio plugin, because what we see is customers wanting to really use Visual Studio when we're dealing with code changes.
Right. I mean, as a ex.NET developer myself, this is where I would spend most of my time.
Exactly.
Would be inside Visual Studio. So, okay.
Yeah. So I'm going to show the porting step within Visual Studio, but both assessment and porting are available from both the standalone version we just saw and the Visual Studio version. So I completed an assessment before the demo. So you can see, just to give you a very high level view, you see that after the assessment is complete, at the bottom, the same assessment results are presented in the error list window, in the warning window. So you can see some of the things that are compatible, some are not compatible. Porting Assistant has kind of done the analysis on the same project and outputted the results in a manner that developers are more familiar with in Visual Studio. It also, what it does is it gives you the green underlined squiggles to tell you, hey, this is not compatible, but if you change it to X to Y, it will be compatible. So this is, part of the assessment view that Porting Assistant does. So next, let's actually go through some of the options here. So as I said, Porting Assistant is also available as a Visual Studio plugin, which is what I'm using here. And I ran a full assessment before. The incremental assessment, I just quickly want to cover it. What it really does is, as you're writing code and making code changes, it will continue to assess it and flag anything that it sees not compatible with .NET. So, you don't have to run a full assessment and wait for the results before it flags lines of code. So you can enable that. And then the next is porting, which is what we talked about, where you can port individual projects or you can port the entire solution. So I'm going to go ahead and port the whole solution, and let's see what happens. So it'll give you this kind of error, just a box saying, hey, changes are final, you want to port, and I'm going to go ahead and port.
This is where the rubber meets the road.
Yes.
So to speak.
Yeah. So porting itself, usually we see assessment is where it really scans the code the first time, and that's why it takes a little bit longer. Generally, we see porting be a little bit comparatively faster too.
So at this point, it's basically taking the project files, it's porting them into the new .NET formats.
Yes.
Is it making any other changes at this point?
Yes. So the changes where Porting Assistant recommends a replacement,
okay.
Some of them it's able to do it itself. So we'll look at some of the Git changes after we've done porting. Also, it updates the CS proj files and just the template versions so that it's compatible with .NET. So a lot of the, kind of undifferentiated manual work is taken care of by Porting Assistant.
Okay.
So it reduces really the work you will do. So it asks once you port to reload all the projects. And I'm just going to kind of go ahead and hit those. Hopefully it doesn't ask too many times.
It really, really, really wants to reload that project.
Yeah.
This is where one of those little birds that dip their beaks in water would just be very useful for your mouse.
You're right. Just hit. Actually, we should have a button that says reload and don't ask me again. So.
Oh, there we go. Ported to .NET 6. Awesome.
All right. So it's ported to .NET 6. Perfect. One more time. Great. So let's see. All right. So if we go to the Git changes, I want to see the solutions is ported. So I want to kind of go ahead and look at, what changes it made. So let's go ahead, maybe look at a file. So here you can kind of see like the changes that were made pre-porting, from pre-porting to when it actually ported. So you can see some of the calls that were made in the code file. I'm just picking a file, like system.web got converted as was needed to ASP.NET Core. And then maybe there will be, I think there are 12, 21 changes. Yeah, so you see the same.
Yeah.
Yes, HTTP context base converted to HTTP context. So a lot of these things are converted by Porting Assistant. Now, what I will say is, porting from .NET Framework to .NET Core is a pretty hard problem. It's and Porting Assistant really tries to help give you a full inventory view and all the tools, and do some of the effort itself to make the work less painful. But there's rarely scenarios where it's like a magic button that you just click and now your application is fully
Yeah,
running.
this is great. I mean, you can see it's doing a tremendous amount of work, porting those CS proj files, changing the code files for you, and so on and so forth. Unfortunately, we are getting very, very close to time here. So is there anything that you would like to leave viewers with, additional information, getting started, etc., before we depart?
Yeah, so like I said, Visual Studio and the Visual Studio and the standalone tool are two ways you can get started using Porting Assistant. And we also have some of the projects open sourced in GitHub. So you can always go and check out the code and check out how we build recommendations and also contribute to it if you feel so.
Wow, that's great.
That is awesome.
Thanks so much, Sananda, for joining us today to talk about the Porting Assistant. I'm looking forward to seeing this more in future.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. This was fun.
All right. Thanks so much. And we'll see you in the next session shortly. So bye for now.